Welcome to Educate, Inform, and Challenge. My name is Teresa MacLennan. I'm Executive Director of the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie. We are so glad that you have joined us and you come alongside us in our conversations. Of course, the intent and the goal of our show is to talk about the lives and experiences of women. We talk about women in business and politics, gender equity, and of course, we talk about violence against women and human trafficking. And we always want to highlight some of the services and how we do provide our services to women as an education for our community. And of course, we're always hoping that if there's a woman who might be watching us today who is having an experience of violence, that she would have an idea of what to expect from our agency and our way that we offer supports. Before we begin, we do want to acknowledge and thank our Indigenous community. We thank you for your culture, your history, the learning and the knowledge that you allow us to know. And we just thank you so much for allowing us to share in this space and to have these conversations. Thank you. So I am honored today to have a conversation with my colleague, Allison Williams, who's the program manager here at the Women and Children and Shelter. And Allison is a wealth of knowledge in terms of how we model and we create unique and diversified services for the unique and diversified needs of our women and children. So welcome, Allison. It is lovely to have you here today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Teresa.
Okay, so let's dive in. Can you share with our viewers kind of the broad range of services that we provide here at the shelter?
Yeah, and I think broad range is a really good, a really good description of what it is that we do. We kind of have two paths. We have outreach service, and we have residential services. So we have a 27-bed shelter that supports women and children to live residentially. Within that program, there's a number of programs. So we have the Women's Service Program, and they're responsible to manage the crisis line and support women that are coming into the shelter and living cooperatively together and connecting them with things and goals that they have set that they want to achieve during their stay. We also have a child support program that staff member is supportive of moms and kids, running some recreational programs, some group programs, lots of great discussions about how to support moms to parent kids who have witnessed violence against moms, and lots of great opportunity for kids to connect in about their feelings, learn about communication, healthy communication between moms and kids. We have a mental health support worker that works within the shelter to help women navigate mental health services, but takes a holistic wellness approach to supporting women to set goals and really look at what they need to move forward, what they want to maybe look at and change. We have a transitional support and housing worker in the shelter as well, and she also provides group facilitation. The other pathway that we have is our outreach services. So we have an outreach counselor that supports, mostly the focus is women that haven't had to come into the shelter residential, but they still need supports. So we have two transitional support and housing workers that also support women out in the community, two group facilitators that are running groups that are out in the community as well for women that aren't in shelter, family court support worker. And I guess the third pathway that we have is our transitional support and housing program, which is a house that has 4 rooms, and it's a cooperative living environment for women that just might need a little bit more support after they've left the shelter, until they move into I'm going to say forever home, as much as that can be.
And what about supports for human trafficking victims?
Yes, yeah, our shelter supports, we have 2 designated beds for human trafficking. Our crisis line is also a support for women who have experienced trafficking. And we have great partnerships with community agencies that make referrals, particularly the police services, victim services will call us, and women can self-refer if they've had experiences of being trafficked, and they can access services, again, through 2 pathways, through the outreach service, or if they need to use one of the 2 designated beds.
So we have a real menu.
We have a
You
real
know,
menu.
It's a very big menu of services, and I think important for our viewers to know that all of those services are offered free of charge, and that we never ask women to financially pay anything towards us because we don't want to create barriers for them. I think that's fair to say. And so, speaking of reducing barriers, can you speak a little bit again about just the mental health and perhaps substance use, and how we approach that for women who might be wrestling with those challenges?
Well, all of our services are provided from a woman-centered approach. And so when women access, whether it's our outreach services or whether it's our shelter services, we're always meeting women where they're at and asking them what it is that they think they need from us. Of course, we understand with the experiences that women have in regards to violence and abuse within their relationships, they're coming in with a lot of, they're carrying a lot of experiences. And so some of the things that they carry, they have coping mechanisms that might involve use of substances or misuse of substances. It makes sense that when women have experienced abuse or violence, they would have some impacts to how they feel about themselves and their mental wellness. And so, again, setting goals with women to just talk to them about what they feel they need, connecting with services that are in the community, but also using our own harm reduction approach with expectations to not be judgmental, to encourage trusting relationships that are built on dignity and respect. And again, just giving women the information that they might be, well, that they're asking for from us, and helping them connect with those services that can also help them longevity.
And so I think it's, to be clear for our viewers, and I think your description of how those services look, offering dignity and respect and no judgment towards the life experiences or the situations that women would find themselves in. For our viewers, we always work to reduce barriers for women to be able to come in. So is it fair to say that we would have women that do come in with their children or on their own who may have significant mental health needs? They might still be very active in their substance use, and they still may be involved in human trafficking. Would that be fair to say?
Oh, for sure. We're that transition place for women and their children. And when I use the term meeting women where they're at, it's meeting women where they're at. All of the experiences that they bring with them as they come into our shelter or into the outreach services. And it's about having those dialogues that are open and honest, and really listening to what women need and supporting them to connect with the things that they need and they want to do to maybe change the situation or address what's happening for them.
Thank you for that, because we always hope that if there is a woman who is just really struggling in a relationship that she's having right now, that she hears your words and just recognizing the welcome that she would receive here, regardless of the situation that she's living in. So I want to start to talk about trauma. And, in about 5 minutes, we're going to be heading into a commercial, but let's start to kind of go down that path. So would it be fair to say that the women and their children who are coming into the shelter have experienced trauma? Let's start there.
Yeah, I think that's really fair to say. We know statistically, most people had experienced at least or had one experience of an event that was traumatic for them. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about the experiences that women and children have, looking through the lens of intimate partner, domestic violence, and I use that language to describe, obviously intimate partner violence, but domestic violence can mean other family members. It can mean extended family, friends that might be intersecting women's lives and creating issues of safety for them. And so, I think of some of the stories that women have shared that bring them into the shelter. what they've navigated as far as types of abuse, like psychological abuse or physical violence, threats, certainly taking the children or threatening to take the children. And the children witnessing some of these things that are happening, some of that violence, some of the assaults that happen for some women that access our service. Yes, those can absolutely be traumatic experiences for women and children.
And is traumatic experiences and how we respond to that different for all of us?
Yeah, each person will have an experience and will experience things in a very individual way. So I think of some of the stories and some of the supports, because I've done a number of different roles in the work. Program manager is one of them, but I've worked in different programs within this organization and other ones as well. And so in my time with working with children, and facilitating conversations and supports between moms and children and trying to foster the communication that really gets broken down when families are living in violent, unsafe situations. And so when we talk about those, often that sharing of those experiences, sometimes that brought them into the shelter or their history of those experiences can be very different. And that can also be very challenging for the other family members to hear, because they really remember things and experience things, the same episode or the same event, very, very differently.
So I guess maybe even their recollection of events and, what happened, or even the severity of it could be very different just based on their own experiences and how they interpret that, their own previous traumas, all of those things.
Mm-hmm. All of those things intersect for sure with women. I think of one particular family situation where one of the children was really talking about the level of fear that she had, how scared she was. And her sibling really couldn't understand that. And her own sharing of that was just so very different. Didn't realize that the other person, her sibling, was really scared at that time and didn't feel that in that event that was happening. So yeah, the memory and remembering things is just very unique and different.
And it's my understanding that we also carry trauma history in our minds, but also our body. Can you just talk really quickly to us about that?
Yeah, I would use the language of muscle memory, right? So when we go into an activated state, our body remembers what is happening in like that's coming in from our brain. So we're feeling that in different places in our body. So when we have another event that could be similar, it can trigger those same feelings and emotions that happen. And so that can create maybe a compounding response or effect to somebody. It can also be meshed in with, there's an experience of violence, but maybe also there's an experience of a car accident that was witnessed. So I would language that of compounding events that come together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to take a very, very short commercial break, and we're going to dive right back into this important conversation. For our viewers at home, please stay with us, and we will be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details. Watching hockey just got a power play with NHL Center Ice and Super Sports Pack. With up to 37 out-of-market NHL games a week, you'll always catch your favorite team no matter where you live. Whether it's big matchups you're looking for or following your top fantasy picks, it's all here. NHL Center Ice, part of the Rogers Super Sports Pack. All this for only $35.95 a month. Order through your remote on Channel 450 or call 1-888-ROGERS-1 today.
Welcome back to Educate, Inform, Challenge. We are having a very great conversation with my friend Allison Williams, who's the program manager here at the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie. And before the commercial, we started to just really open up the conversation about trauma and how we can all have experiences of trauma in our life, some resolved, perhaps some maybe not, and that's on a continuum. And so where we want to talk and lead our conversation now is about how do any of us that have an experience of trauma, and it's very relative to our own experience, how does trauma actually influence then our behavior and how we react to other people? So, Allison, I want to kind of give you the floor about that, and maybe let's start there. How does trauma influence our behavior and actions?
Well, I think there's a structure in talking about trauma. So what comes to mind for me is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses that occur for people. And so and I think they're somewhat self-explanatory about what can happen, right? So when we get triggered and our body is reacting, and that's the language I would use, there's a reaction as opposed to a response. It affects how our brain operates, it affects our memory, it affects our ability to manage information. Things can become very broken in understanding what maybe is being said to us. There can be expressions of very heightened emotion that happens for people as well. People can freeze and they can not know or not be able to move or talk at certain times. The fight response is coming out lots of anger. We might see with somebody, you might describe it as coming at somebody, right? Because there's just so much that's happening. So I would say that those are kind of the pieces of what we see in regards to impacts for women, how we might see trauma playing out in some of the behavior. And when I think about it in the context of in the shelter, we might see examples. I would say often there's an emotional charge that's happening for people. And, there's a lot of information that happens when women come in for intake, and we're giving those pieces of information, and what she retains can be very minimal because there's just so much information. And I think of that process of leaving home and coming in and having your children. There's so much going on for people. So we might see things like we've given those pieces of information or had those conversations and she can't remember. She might appear scattered, right? And sometimes women will say that I have this scattered brain and I can't remember your name. And, when we use kind of the relation to the fawn response, we might see women really wanting to please staff, right? Or really apologetic for not remembering your name. We could see things like that.
Yeah. And so when women are coming into the shelter and they've been hurt by someone that they had the expectation was going to care for them and someone that they could trust, when they come into the shelter, and of course, our wonderful staff are trying to build a relationship with them, how does their trauma impact that ability for them to trust and build relationships with us?
Mm-hmm. I think it's very difficult for some women to have that trust. And for those reasons, we have these expectations, and as women in society, we're conditioned into a role as well, that if we love enough, that should be enough, right? And we give enough, and we're doing those, that we're interacting in that relationship in that way. So when that isn't requited or it isn't demonstrated in a way that women deserve, you can see some of the breakdown that can happen. And so the learning is, I can't trust. And so trying to build those relationships between staff, there's another dynamic that's happening because staff holds power. So that comes into it as well. There's a power dynamic that is between staff and women. So building that trust sometimes can take a long time, and it needs to take small steps. Again, meeting that woman and really hearing her and seeing and listening to what it is that she needs in order to build that trust. That I find comes out of staff taking an approach of, I say, dignity and respect for women, for themselves and their interactions, and, compassion, right? Compassion and caring and patience.
Yeah. So you've really kind of, stepped into the other question that I had, which was just about what is the approach and the strategy to be able to support women to really work with and through the experiences that they've had, right? And I guess the question too is, how do you, as the program manager, support employees to have that trauma-informed lens of support to women? Because I also think that vicarious trauma can also be for the employees as well. So, I think this is a bigger question about how you support the team, and so that those supports lend to dignity and respect of the women, but also a mindfulness about keeping the employee team whole. It's a big question, but what would you like to say about how you do that?
It is a big question. And so the first thing that comes to mind is we talk about, and certainly what this program is, right? It's about educate and inform, and also challenge. We need to challenge our own values and beliefs. We need to check our own biases that are coming in. We need to be aware of our own experiences of trauma and how that intersects our ability to be present for the women and children that we're servicing. Staff need to be trained. They need to have knowledge about what a trauma-informed approach is, and I'm very pleased to say our staff is well versed in that. And daily, I see them using the approaches of slowing down conversations and finding a space that isn't so busy, a quiet space that a woman is feeling comfortable in to have that conversation. Wearing name tags and saying their name as many times, and assuring women when they're asking those questions over and over that that's okay. And we normalize those experiences by our feedback to women and what we see happening. We debrief, we talk about, and that's part of my role with staff, to touch base with them. Sometimes we have team meetings or case conferences where we have opportunity to talk about impacts to us, but mostly the focus is on the strategies that we use to keep whole in our own experiences with women, and strategies that we can use creatively to best support the women and children as well.
So I should imagine that you have some very compassionate and empathetic conversations, of course, with the women, but with the employees too. That vicarious trauma, I think you're always mindful of for them, and balancing the trauma-informed approach to the hurt that can happen for the employees. Let's say when they've been yelled at, as an example, right?
Yeah.
How do you create balance there for the staff to understand where that's coming from the woman, but also then the health and safety of the employees?
Again, we go back to just having those opportunities to have the conversations of what's happening in our own process with trauma and how that might be intersecting. And when I think about some of the most challenging pieces that come with doing this work, I would have to say that vicarious trauma is at the top of the list. And I think that it's also somewhat silent in people's experiences, because we don't always think about when we're holding those stories, because we have this incredible intention as helpers and to be present. We can sometimes abandon our own needs in opening ourselves to helping people that need help. And so those conversations, certainly like I talked about in the case conference or the individual supervision with staff, is about delving into a little bit about how we manage that and how we do our own self-reflections to recognize what's coming up for us, and how we identify when that is happening, and some strategies of what we might need to do to address that or talk it out, or sometimes and I've said this before about self-care. We say it a lot. I think that it is overstated, but I think it is also underrated. And trying to find that balance of how important self-care is in managing and balancing ourselves in the work that we do.
I think we could do many episodes just talking about self-care and wellness, because it's one of those terms that gets thrown around an awful lot, but I don't know if we spend enough time to actually talk about it, what it really is for us as individuals, and then implement it, right? And then so I think maybe we'd love to have you come back so we could dive into that, just about how you lead a team to be mindful of their wellness and their self-care when they're working in trauma every single day.
Yes, yeah.
I'm curious what your thoughts are about this. And I know that our time is, of course, gone by so quickly here, but is it easier for us to blame others or to say the responsibility is with others in their trauma reaction, as opposed to looking within ourselves about why it is that that reaction is bothering us?
Yeah, I think that first layer of exposure definitely is that. It's hard not to take personally someone's reaction to you when you step into an intention of helping. I come into work to help people, and I'm here to help people. And now somebody is really heightened and is maybe really angry. Maybe there's things that are being said that are hurtful, or somebody might be avoiding. And so there might be, like, I've tried to talk to her and ask her to come in. And so I think it's the balance of really looking at that and asking myself that question, what's coming up for me? Because this feels a little bit too personalized. Mm-hmm. And so there's lots of discussions that we have around how do we separate out what is my own experience that might be intersecting here. We call it, the language we use is a transference. What is happening for me that reminds me of my own story that's coming forward in this moment? And so I think that could be a whole other show in itself as well.
I agree, right? Because that self-reflection, and it can be so incredibly hard to do, because I think in some ways it's easier. I just want to say that this is about you. This isn't about me. Sure. But, and I'm going to use some language that I hear you say frequently, which is we are the women that we support.
Yes, we are.
And they are us. and so, doing that personal work is so important and so hard to do. And it's not maybe a place of comfort for a lot of folks to reflect on ourselves. It's easier just to reflect on the actions of others and lay blame and shame there. So we have less than 1 minute left. And Allison, I just want to thank you so much for the conversation today, because I think that importance of educating our community about what trauma-informed is maybe encourages all of us in the community to be reflective of that and to grow more in our learning and acceptance, I think, of anyone's experience. So I thank you so much for being with us here today. And thank you to our community as well. And we really hope there's been some insight for you. If you are a woman who's in need of service, please contact our crisis line at 705-728-2544. We would really love to hear from you. And hopefully you have a sense of how we would approach creating a unique and diverse service for you. Please take care, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.